Welcome to Whiskey Cast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 748 for January 6th, 2019. Coming up in a few minutes.
They can pick out what bourbon it is in a blind tasting. That's impressive. And I've been in this industry for a long, long time. And I thought that I could do that. And when we were putting this test together, I practiced it with a sommelier friend of mine. And it's hard, even when you know what the whiskey is, to say, hey, definitively, I think this is that particular bourbon.
Later this month, a bunch of bourbon lovers will get the chance to compete for bragging rights and a $2,000 cash prize in the first ever Big Blind Bourbon Taste-Off in Lexington, Kentucky. Daniel Marlowe of Lexington's Whiskey Bear Bar is one of the organizers of what may well be the first whiskey tasting competition in the U.S. We'll talk about it with him on Whiskey Cast in Depth. That's coming up along with the calendar of events, the What I'm Tasting This Week department, and on Your Voice, we'll share some of your first drams of the new year. All on this first episode for 2019 of Whiskey Cast.
From far beyond the wall comes a whiskey for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. Blended Scotch whiskey, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
Whiskey Cast. Brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
Let's start things off with the news. It's brought to you by Highland Park. And once again, it's been a fairly quiet week this week because of the New Year's holiday, but things should start to get busy again in the coming week as people return to work from the holidays. We did have some news. The first deals of 2019 involved who else but Sazerac. The privately held company has been aggressively investing in spirits brands for the last couple of years, and we got word of the two latest deals pretty much as soon as New Year's Day ended. Sazerac has increased its stake in India's John Distilleries after buying Gaja Capital's remaining 20% stake in the company. Back in October, Sazerac bought 23% of John Distilleries' outstanding shares from Gaja. Founder Paul John owns the remaining 57% of the company, which is best known for the single malt whiskeys that carry his name. No price was announced for the transaction. Meanwhile, Sazerac also announced a deal this week to buy 19 value brands from New York-based Star Industries. That portfolio includes Black Prince Scotch Whiskey, the Donegal Irish Whiskey, and the R.J. Hodges American Whiskey. Once again, no purchase price was announced. Meanwhile, Diageo's plans to invest more than $200 million into its Scotch whiskey distilleries are moving ahead. East Lothian Council has signed off on the plans to expand Glenkinchie Distillery. It's one of the 4 core distilleries that will be linked to the planned Johnny Walker Experience in Edinburgh. The expansion will include a new bar and events area, along with new tasting rooms and other amenities. That overall project also includes the revival of the Port Ellen Distillery on Islay, and there's news to report from Islay on that as well. Last month, Diageo filed the initial paperwork required to get planning approval for the project with the Argyll and Bute Council. It's called a Proposal of Application Notice and serves as a formal notice to the community that a project is in the works. That opens the way for public feedback on the plan to bring Port Ellen Distillery back to life for the first time since it closed in 1983. The protocol requires at least 12 weeks from the proposal of application notice before the formal application for planning permission can be submitted. Last year, Diageo assigned Lagavulin distillery manager Georgie Crawford to head up the Port Ellen Revival Project, which was originally scheduled to be completed next year. So far, no change has been announced in that timetable. And another Isla distillery project has completed that step of the approval process. Specialty Drinks has filed its application for planning approval with the council. We first reported on this last April. Specialty Drinks is owned by Sukinder and Raj Singh of the Whiskey Exchange, and they are planning to build a distillery along the coastline between Port Ellen and the Lefroy Distillery. No word yet on when the council will vote on the project. We did have some new whiskeys announced this week. Douglas Lang & Company is releasing a cask-strength edition of its Timorous Beastie 12-year-old Highland blended malt. It's bottled at 54.4% ABV. 3,000 bottles will be available in Europe and Asia for a recommended retail price of around £60, about $76 a bottle. Avengerg Distillery on Scotland's Isle of Lewis has released its first 10-year-old single malts. The flagship edition is bottled at 46% ABV and will sell for around £80 a bottle in the UK. There is also a special release that uses whiskey from the distillery's first 10-year-old cask. Only 100 bottles will be available. The price, £475 a bottle. South Africa's James Sedgwick Distillery is releasing a new 15-year-old edition of its Baines single grain whiskey for the travel retail market. It'll debut this coming Thursday, January 10th, in the Big 5 duty-free shop at Johannesburg's O.R. Tambo International Airport. Longtime master distiller Andy Watts will be there to sample it and sign bottles that day. And if you're in the Washington, D.C. area, there's a new Capitals World Champions whiskey on sale to celebrate the Washington Capitals Stanley Cup win last summer. It's not distilled in Washington, though, even though there are several local distilleries. It comes from Palmetto Distillery in South Carolina, which became an official sponsor of the team last year. According to NBC Sports Washington, it's available in the District of Columbia, Virginia, and Maryland, as well as through Palmetto's online shop. There's also a Capitals World Championship Moonshine available too. And finally, if you live in Ohio and signed up for the State Liquor Agency's annual lottery for a chance to buy a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle or one of the Buffalo Trace Antique Collection whiskeys, well, let's just say your odds are better than winning the Powerball lottery, but not by much. State officials say more than 73,000 people signed up for the lottery. That's almost triple the number who signed up last year, and there are only between 800 and 900 bottles available. Winners will be notified later this month after they are verified as Ohio residents of legal drinking age, and they'll be able to buy their bottles between January 25th and February 1st. Here's the thing. The state is charging list price for those bottles, and any that are not picked up will be available to anyone after that. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com. The news is brought to you by Highland Park, the Orkney single malt with Viking soul. If you live in the Northern Hemisphere, this is just about the darkest time of the year. But you can enjoy those dark nights with Highland Park's The Dark limited edition single malt. Look for it at a whiskey shop near you and find out more at highlandparkwhiskey.com. Time now for the Whiskey Cast calendar of events. The Harrow Whiskey Festival in London kicks off 2019 this coming weekend on January 11th and 12th. Kalen's 80-20 in Louisville, Kentucky hosts Brent Elliott of Four Roses for a tasting January 14th. The Edmonton MS Whiskey Festival is on the 16th in Edmonton, Alberta. followed the next night by the Calgary MS Whiskey Festival. Join us again this year for special coverage from the Victoria Whiskey Festival in Victoria, British Columbia. It runs from the 17th through the 20th. Tickets are still available for the Whiskey Exchange's tasting of the 2018 Diageo Special Releases with Colin Dunn. It's on January 21st in London. Hansa Spirit is January 31st through February 2nd in Hamburg, Germany. And Buffalo Trace Distillery hosts its annual Buffalo Love Valentine's Dinner. It's February 9th in Frankfort, Kentucky. Right now, we have 152 different events on the searchable calendar at whiskycast.com. If you have a festival, a tasting, or any other whiskey-related event coming up, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to let us know about it, and we'll add it to the list.
Everyone knows the expression, "'tis better to give than to receive." At Redbreast, we don't think the two are mutually exclusive. Maybe it's better to give Redbreast and receive. Like receiving a glass or two right away for your thoughtful gift of Ireland's definitive single pot still whiskey. Or receiving that, "Hey, thanks again for that bottle of Redbreast," a month later. Or receiving that shout out in a wedding speech for introducing the groom to Redbreast, completely overlooking the fact that you introduced him to his bride as well. What we're trying to say is, introducing someone to Redbreast will come back to you in unexpected ways. Redbreast, you've landed on something special. Now be sure to share it. Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
WhiskyCast In Depth is brought to you by Lagavulin. There are plenty of competitions to determine the best whiskeys, but very few to determine the best whiskey tasters. There's one every year in Port Ellen during the Isla Festival of Malt and Music, and the Australian Malt Whisky Tasting Championship has been held off and on in Sydney over the years. But as far as I know, and someone I'm sure will correct me if I'm wrong on this, there has never been one in the U.S., and there has certainly never been one held in Kentucky. That will change coming up on January 19th in Lexington, with the debut of the Big Blind Bourbon Taste-Off at Fritz Farm. The winner gets $2,000 in cash, a barrelhead trophy, and best of all, bragging rights. I mentioned this event in our last episode during the calendar of events. At the time, the original plan called for 5 nights of preliminary heats in the week leading up to a Saturday afternoon semifinal round, followed by the finals that night. That plan proved to be just a bit unwieldy, and it has now been scaled back to a one-day event with 2 afternoon heats and a final round on Saturday night the 19th. And given that this is something that's never been tried before in Kentucky, it is understandable that there would be some snags. Daniel Marlowe is one of the event's founders, and he's one of the owners of the Whiskey Bear Bar in Lexington.
I can't take all of the credit for that. That was Whit Heiler from Kentucky for Kentucky. Really brought the original idea of a bourbon tasting competition up at a meeting that we had with him. They have one of their locations right adjacent to our Whiskey Bear location on the summit. And so he said, "Hey, I think it would be a great idea to do some sort of bourbon tasting competition with a prize." And to our knowledge, nobody had ever done anything like that quite this way. And so we started bouncing some ideas back and forth and really just kind of ran with it. And it seemed like a really fun way to get people talking about bourbon and also talking about how to taste bourbon, how to taste whiskeys. Because up to this point, most of the competitions that you see are for the best bourbon or the best pour under $50 or bottle under $50, whatever. This is more of, how to actually pick out the different nuances in the spirit itself and kind of understand what's happening when you taste different flavors.
And I know you're working with Tim Nettle to do a couple of practice sessions or at least training sessions ahead of this. But how is this going to work?
So the idea is based loosely off of how a sommelier gets tested in the wine world. So, a sommelier, they will come in and they are blind tasting a wine, and they're trying to guess what varietal it is, what grape it is, where it's from, based on what they taste. And we felt like taking that approach to whiskey would be a really fun way to get people kind of past just what they see on a label. Most of us buy something based on how it looks or what we're told about it. And I think if you've been drinking whiskey for a while or bourbon for a while, I think it's really easy to be surprised in a blind taste. Maybe by trying something that you thought you didn't like, and then they tell you what it is, and you had no idea that you liked that whiskey because there wasn't an association attached to it. And so we felt like this was a great opportunity to really increase the dialogue around bourbon and around how to taste whiskeys. And then on top of that, just a really fun way to get people together who enjoy great whiskeys. So that was kind of the overarching idea. We worked closely with Tim Niddle to do some different events at Whiskey Bear over the last year, and we're really excited to have him kind of plug in and help out with this event some as well. He's just got a wonderful palate, and he's got a great teacher's mentality to really break whiskey down and break bourbon down into something that's really manageable for people that don't know much about it, and he makes it really fun to learn about. So we're excited to work with him.
Now, I've never seen a whiskey tasting competition that offered a cash prize of $2,000 before.
Yeah, we felt like that would at least make it a little bit more interesting and buzzworthy. To be honest, I think the $2,000 cash prize is fantastic. I think the bragging rights from an event like this really would make it extra special. And so in a place like Kentucky, where we're the birthplace of bourbon, 95%, I think was the last I heard, of the world's bourbon is made right here in this state. People take it very seriously. They take a lot of pride in it. So to be able to say that, you've got one of the best palates in the bluegrass is definitely saying something when it comes to the spirit.
But you're not just restricting it to Kentucky residents. Anybody can take part in this, right?
Absolutely. Yes. It is open to anyone that wants to come in. We'd love to have some people coming in from out of state. I definitely have talked to a few people that are considering coming in from other parts of the country. I don't know if they've made their plans yet, but we're really excited to invite anyone that wants to be a part of this.
And that would include professionals. I could see some of my buddies in Kentucky, like Fred Minnick or Mike Veach or some of these guys who do this stuff for a living, going up for a $2,000 cash prize.
Absolutely. I think because it's blind and because we're not trying to pick out what the best bourbon is necessarily, it really is just to see, who can pick out the nuances and the flavors. You certainly don't have to be a professional to take part in this. I think we might get some people that have had more training in that regard. But if you like food and you like whiskey and you like playing around with different flavors, then I think it really is, anybody has a good chance at winning.
Let's talk now about how this is going to work, because you have changed it from the original plan. How's it going to work now?
So we have decided to consolidate the competition to a one-day event, which will now take place on January 19th. It's a Saturday. And in doing so, we are going to be cutting out the semifinal round. So we're going to have two larger preliminary heats of 100 contestants each, one at 1:30 p.m. and then another one at 3 p.m. that Saturday. And then the final will be at 6 p.m. That Saturday. The top 25 total scores from the first 200 people will advance to the final and will compete again with two tasters of bourbon for the final. Originally, we had planned on having two tasters for the prelims and then two for the semifinals and one for the final. Now it's just going to be two for the prelims and two for the final. And so they'll be blind tasting two bourbons, filling out a sheet based on the flavor profile, what they smell, what they taste. They're going to be guessing on mass bill ranges. They're going to guess on the proof. They're going to guess on mouthfeel, and it's mostly all multiple choice. So they don't have to just come up with this out of the blue. There are different options for them to choose from. And then there will be a question if they can guess what distillery it's from and what bourbon it actually is. Those will be weighted fairly heavily. If they can pick out what bourbon it is in a blind tasting, that's impressive. And I've been in this industry for a long, long time, and I thought that I could do that. And when we were putting this test together, I practiced it with a sommelier friend of mine, and it's hard, even when you know what the whiskey is, to say, hey, definitively, I think this is that particular bourbon.
This obviously makes it a little bit easier for somebody who wants to come in and do this from out of town, because they can do it now in one day.
Indeed, that was really the main impetus for this, is for people to try to schedule unknowns for over a 6-day period, who may live regionally or even be coming in from out of the state or further away. It makes traveling and planning a little bit more difficult. So we wanted to make it easy for anybody that was interested to take part, and let them come and have a great time with us.
How's the response been since we last talked? Because you've cut the number of potential participants almost in half now. Have you, by doing this change from a 5-day to a 1-day, how's the response been? So far, the folks that had already purchased their tickets, we haven't had any pushback or problems. I think there was maybe one person that had a slight scheduling difficulty, but everybody's been really responsive so far. And all of the feedback that we've gotten from other parties and other interested people have really said that makes it a lot more enticing to them to be able to just make it a 1-day thing. So I think it's a very positive spin and reception that we've gotten from that. We have been fortunate enough to have Freddie Johnson from Buffalo Trace come in to MC the semifinal and the final event. We just really wanted to have somebody that had strong ties and roots to the bourbon industry here, and really could bring some fun into this as well. And I think Freddie, for anybody that's had the chance to meet him on a Buffalo Trace tour, just understands how much reverence there is, and his close ties, generational ties to the bourbon world and Kentucky in general. But nobody should read anything into what these bourbons might be based on Freddie taking part. No, we did not allow any actual sponsorships, and we had some distilleries that wanted to be a part of this. We spoke with Buffalo Trace and said, look, we want this to be a true blind tasting, and we want people to we just don't want to mess with the integrity of that. But because Freddie has such a strong tie, we were okay with them sponsoring the event in that way and letting Freddie come and be a part of the actual event itself. I was being facetious on that, of course, but... Well, but it's honest, and we really want people to know that we're taking this seriously. This is a very fun event, and we want it to be fun. But at the same time, there's a cash prize there, and we don't take that lightly. We want people to feel like everyone has a fair shake here, and nobody gets any kind of special treatment. So how much interest have you had from outside of Kentucky as well as inside? I think we've sold close to 25%, somewhere about 20 or 25% of the tickets. So we still have a lot of tickets left over or available at the moment. We announced this right before Christmas, and so I think we're really about to start kind of advertising it a little bit more heavily. Right through the holidays, everybody was more worried about trying to get their last-minute Christmas gifts for their friends. So we definitely still have quite a lot of tickets available. And, of course, all of these heats are going to be open for spectators, too. Yes, we certainly encourage people to bring their crowd to cheer them on to victory. Or at least not embarrassment. Because there's a potential for real embarrassment here. I've been burned on blind tastings so many times in the past. It's not easy, but that also is what makes it fun. I think we will, at the conclusion of the entire event, let people know what whiskeys they tasted, so that they can kind of get an idea of maybe, hey, that second one that I tasted in the preliminaries, I really liked that. And who knows, it might end up being a bourbon that you didn't know that you liked at all. So how big can you get this event in the future? I assume this is not going to be the only time you do this. Yeah, I think this is certainly the first run. We see that if it goes well, there are a lot of opportunities to really explore and do different types of events of this nature with maybe other whiskeys. And, we had, even for this one, looked at incorporating any Kentucky spirit. So we've talked about maybe bringing rye in. And I think that, again, the whole goal here is just to really generate and create more dialogue and fun opportunities to share the world of whiskey.
And so because we're in Kentucky and bourbon is such a part of this culture, we wanted to start there. But I think there's strong potential to have this event really grow and grow into something really special.
By the way, Tim Niddle will be leading one last palate training session before the competition at Whiskey Bear in Lexington. It's this coming Saturday, January 12th. And if you are thinking of entering, the entry fee is $50 per person, but the organizers are offering a 10% discount to WhiskeyCast listeners. Just use the discount code WhiskeyCast-10 when you sign up. There's a link in our show notes at whiskeycast.com. And that's WhiskeyCast in Depth, brought to you by Lagavulin, the legendary Islay single malt. Look for the new House Lannister Lagavulin 9-year-old. It's part of the Game of Thrones single malt Scotch whiskey collection from Diageo and HBO. Look for it at a whiskey shop near you, and check out the rest of the Lagavulin single malts at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery, and later on during Your Voice, I'll share some of the drams that you told us were your last drams of 2018, as well as your first drams of 2019. New Year's Eve, I gave Twitter followers the chance to vote on my last dram of the year, and they picked a Gordon and MacPhail Rare Vintage Glen Grant distilled in 1954 and bottled in 2014, just shy of 60 years old. It was bottled right at 40% ABV, and the nose has notes of toffee, toasted caramel, a hint of brandy, and a touch of oak tannins that makes the aroma slightly dry. The taste is dry, with notes of sherry and those same oak tannins, along with plums, raisin bread, toffee, a hint of anise, and soft spices in the background. The finish is very long, with hints of Christmas cake, oak tannins, and subtle spices. I'm scoring Gordon and MacPhail's Glen Grant 1954, my last dram of 2018, a 94. My first dram of 2019 was not quite as old, the Cambus 40-year-old single grain from Diageo's 2016 Special Releases series. It's bottled at 52.7% ABV, and the nose has touches of dark chocolate fudge, along with fresh berries, dried fruits, and a hint of straw. The taste has spicy notes of cinnamon, clove, and lemon pepper, balanced nicely by hints of peaches, pears, and honey. The finish is long with lingering spices, dried flowers, and hints of peaches and pears. I'm scoring the Cambus 40-year-old single grain a 94. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, our tasting notes are brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. 85 years ago, as the end of Prohibition meant a renewed demand for Kentucky bourbon, Ed Shapira and his brothers invested in a new distillery in Bardstown. They bought their partners out later on, and today, that little startup is the largest family-owned and operated distillery. Get the entire history at heavenhilldistillery.com. Think wisely, drink wisely. Now let's look at the Aberfeldy 16-year-old Madeira cask finish that's available in the travel retail market. It's bottled at 40% ABV. The nose is complex and rich with touches of citrus fruits, honey, and muted spices. The taste has great spicy notes of cinnamon and allspice, along with apple cobbler, vanilla, and honey. The finish is long and well-balanced, as the cinnamon spice fades away gently, while honey and apple notes tickle the back of your throat. I'm scoring the Aberfeldy 16-year-old Madeira cask finish a 93. Finally, let's look at the Balvenie 25-year-old single barrel. While there may be subtle differences between barrels, the consistent bottling strength at 47.8% ABV takes care of most of the major differences. The nose has notes of apple pie, honeycomb, a hint of anise, and a good maltiness. The taste is spicy with hints of allspice and ginger, while barley sugar, berry cobbler, and a hint of apples add balance. The finish is long and malty with barley sugar, a hint of anise, and fading spices. I'm scoring the Balvenie 25-year-old single barrel a 93. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. I've added these whiskeys and the other ones I tasted this week to our searchable list of more than 2,400 different whiskeys. You'll find it at whiskycast.com.
From deep in the north, far beyond the wall, the howl of the frozen wind brings word of something new. A whiskey from the land of always winter, for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. Blended Scotch whiskey, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice, presented by Lot 40. Thanks to everyone who shared their last drams of 2018 and first drams of 2019 with us on social media over the last few days. Christopher Winters in Zionsville, Indiana, reminded us on Facebook that he always ends a year with that year's scotch. So he picked a Glenmorangie 18-year-old to end 2018 and dug deep into the back of his cabinet and found a 19-year-old Imperial 1990 for the new year. At Law School Drunk on Twitter said his first dram of 2019 was the Deveron 12-year-old, distilled at Macduff Distillery. He says, never tasted it before, bought it in the summer of 2016 for $44.99 after tax. Heather, green apples, and citrus notes. His last dram of 2018 was, as he put it, a simple maker's mark in memory of Dave Pickerel. From Chicago, John Newfree tweeted this. So my last dram of 2018 was a Bruichladdich Laddie Classic, and my first of 2019 was a Kilchoman Sauterne Matured. Hashtag Isla. Kent Crittenden of Calgary, Alberta, tweeted us a photo of his New Year's dram, the Ardbeg Bicentenary Committee release from 2015. And Ryan Campbell tweeted, found the 3-chord 12-year-old bourbon, so that will probably be my last. First of 2019 will be the Van Winkle 10 I scored on the same outing. Finally, Brent Stewart rounds it out with this tweet and a photo of his empty bottle of Glen Elgin 18-year-old. Meant to post last dram of 2018. Cheers to 2019. See you next year at the New Brunswick Spirits Festival. Glen Elgin 18, hashtag Heel Slayer. His second tweet had his first dram of 2019, the 41-year-old Canadian Club. If you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at WhiskeyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your Voice is presented by Lot 40, Canada's award-winning 100% pot still rye whiskey. Lot 40, unapologetically Canadian. Please drink responsibly. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the science, history, and other stuff that make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. Last fall, Beam Suntory released the second edition of Freddie No's Little Book Whiskey. No Simple Task is a blend of 3 different whiskeys, 8-year-old Kentucky Rye, 13-year-old Canadian Rye, and one that stood out as soon as I saw it. And you might get a hint from what Brent Stewart had for his first dram of 2019 that I mentioned just a second ago. You see, it's a 40-year-old Canadian whiskey distilled from 100% corn. Now, with some blends, it's hard to figure out where the component whiskeys come from, but this one was easy. The Kentucky rye came from either the Jim Beam Distillery in Claremont or the Booker No Distillery down the road in Boston. The Canadian rye came from Beam Suntory's Alberta Distillers in Calgary. And that 40-year-old Canadian whiskey, it sounds a lot like a certain Canadian club release from 2017. All I had to do was ask Tish Harkis of Canadian Club.
So how the hell did Freddie No get his hands on some 40-year-old Canadian juice for Little Book?
Here's the thing. When our company discovers a whiskey that they kind of thought, when people think about whiskey at 30, 40, 50 years old, you think, there could be a good possibility that stuff might have gone a little skunky. Anyways, when I tested it, gave samples to all the executives, we all went, holy cow, this stuff has survived all these years and it's absolutely fantastic. So they saw the success of the 40-year and they said, can we have a little bit of that? And we said, absolutely. So that's what happened there. So we did lay enough down way back in 1977, 2 bonds, August 1977, September 1977. So we have enough to share with our sister brand. And you know what? We're very proud. I haven't tried the whiskey yet, but I can't wait to try what they've done with it.
There are times when it helps to be part of a larger distilling family. By the way, Canadian Club released a 41-year-old version of that same whiskey this past year. It's the one that Brent Stewart had as his first dram of 2019. A 42-year-old version is coming later this year. If you have something you'd like us to look at on Behind the Label, just use the contact form at whiskeycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copperpot, a unique triple distilled premium Irish whiskey, combining single malt and single pot still. First fashioned in the 1700s and still a rarity today. Sure, as we say in Ireland, what's rare is wonderful. Writer's Tears Copperpot.
That's all for this edition of Whiskey Cast. We've posted links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskeycast.com. That's also where you'll find links for our WhiskeyCast HD videos and the WhiskeyCast Tasting Panel podcast, along with the latest whiskey news, events, tasting notes, and a complete archive of all of our past episodes. I hope you'll take a minute this week to share WhiskeyCast with your friends. If they're not familiar with podcasts, show them how to use that podcast app on their smartphone to discover WhiskeyCast and all of the other free content that's out there. Remember, friends help friends discover podcasts. You can also help other people discover WhiskeyCast by leaving a review or rating for us wherever you download your podcasts. We'd love to hear from you. The email address is comments@whiskeycast.com. You'll find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at WhiskeyCast.
WhiskeyCast. Brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
From far beyond the wall comes a whiskey for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. Blended Scotch whiskey, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
WhiskeyCast is a production of Cast Strength Media, copyright 2019, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.